Australia don't tend to think of our freshwater species because we tend to think that Australia is just a very hot, very dry country. And we are. We've got 200 or 300 different species of native freshwater fish, which seems like heaps, but in terms of globally, it's really not that much. But the species we do have are absolutely amazing. These guys are called green and golden bell frogs. They're a very well-known species of Australian frog. They are a cousin of the growling grass frogs that we get here in Melbourne and the green tree frog. They're all quite closely related. Now, for the most part, these guys aren't supposed to be very good climbers. If you have a look at this dude back here, no one's told him. If you have a look, they've still got those suckers on their toes, but they're a lot smaller than the suction pads that we get on things like our green tree frogs that are much more arboreal. They spend more time in the trees. That's why it's kind of chosen to stick in the corner here. Because when they get to full size like this, out on the flat surfaces, they're going to start slipping. The suckers aren't strong enough. But in the corner, he can kind of put some pressure and get a bit further up. Now, just like their cousins, the growling grass frogs, these guys have got some very weird ways of going about their business. First of all, they don't mind coming out during the day. That's really, really strange because most of our frogs here in Australia come out at night. What they'll do is they'll come out and through the reeds and aquatic vegetation, they'll bask in the sun, just like a blue tongue, and get nice and warm in the sunlight, get all that good UV radiation. They look very similar to our growling grass frogs as well, but there's one very big difference. Well, there's two. First of all, where they're found, we'll talk about that in a minute, but also their back. You can kind of see, he's kind of looking right at the camera now. On his back, it's very, very smooth. They've got very smooth skin on their back. Our growling grass frogs, their backs are very, very bumpy, which gives them another name, the warty swamp frog, which I think is a little bit of a mean name. It kind of makes them sound a bit gross, doesn't it? But they're not. There's nothing wrong with a swamp. Swamps are very important, but that's a great way that you can tell the difference between the two of them. And in some parts of their range, especially right out in eastern Victoria, you can find both species. So it's a really cool way to be able to tell them apart. Now, for the most part, these guys are found further north, whereas the growling grass frogs go from kind of over the border into South Australia, right across Victoria and up towards the border of New South Wales in the east. These guys are found from far east Gippsland right up through Sydney and further north in New South Wales along the coast. They used to be found in a lot more places. Just like our growling grass frogs, they have suffered a lot of habitat loss, and now in parts of the Sydney Basin and further south, where a lot of the land that they used to live on has been cleared and changed, these guys aren't really found there anymore. That said, they are found in some quite interesting places. One of the best places you can see some of these guys is in Homebush, which is the part of Sydney where all the Olympians stayed back in the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. The water there isn't the cleanest, and a lot of those creeks and things are all kind of half concrete now. It's not fantastic habitat, but these guys still persist. They are tough when they need to be tough. Now, these guys hunt mostly for invertebrates. They eat a lot of insects and spiders and things. When they're small, when they've just come out of the water, they'll also hunt along the water's edge, and they'll eat the little mosquito wrigglers, the little baby mosquitoes when they're still in the water wriggling around like this. The baby frogs absolutely love them. As they get bigger, they take on bigger prey. And one of their favourite foods, just like our growlers, is other species of frog. In fact, they'll even eat smaller members of their own species. They'll be cannibals, which is a little bit strange. But there should be plenty of them to go around. Unfortunately, it's not the case anymore. They've lost a lot of their habitat. Pollution really impacts on these guys. And of course, they've been suffering from that horrible chytrid fungus, their own pandemic that amphibians have been dealing with since the 1980s. It's really, really not good. It's actually quite terrifying. It's impacted on frogs and other amphibians all over the world. We've seen huge declines in amphibians in some areas. And in Australia, we've already had 4 species of frog go extinct because of chytrid, partly or completely. And another 10 are very, very close. And these guys are next in line with our growlers as well. Luckily, they're a fairly well-known species, and you can buy, at different times of year, chocolate green and golden bell frogs and help raise a little bit of money to help save these very, very beautiful frogs. Now, these guys are important, and all frogs are important, because they can be fantastic environmental indicators. What that means is if we go out to, let's say, a pond out in the bush, and we see lots of different species of frogs, and we see tadpoles and baby frogs and adult frogs of lots of different species, we know, okay, conditions here must be pretty good. Because when something goes wrong, frogs tend to be more sensitive to it than a lot of our other species. And they are indicators because they can show us very early on if something's gone wrong. If there are no frogs at all, if there's only 1 or 2 species of frog, if the frogs are all adults and the other stages of their life aren't there, we can go, okay, something's going on here. Some species, like our common froglets and our spotted marsh frogs, they're pretty tough. And even if the water's a little bit rank or a little bit polluted, they'll still live there. But some of our more sensitive species, they'll start disappearing. And even though everything can look nice and green and clean and lush, there might be something going on. And so our indicator species can help us to figure it out before it starts affecting other species in the environment, and we can help to restore the balance if there's been some pollution or a chemical leak or just something's gone wrong. These guys can help us as an early alarm and give us the opportunity to do something nice and quick before everything else goes downhill, because that's not what we want to happen. And then the frogs can slowly start to recover. Let's move on to another freshwater species. This is one you guys have met. I know you've met him before. He's one of my favorites. Let's get out Rex. This is Rex, and Rex is our very well-known, well-loved, and well-fed broad-shelled turtle. What is the funny dance that you're currently doing? What are we doing? Stop! Broad-shelled turtles are the largest species of long-necked turtle in the world, and they are the largest freshwater species of turtle in Australia. Rex is definitely the biggest turtle at Reptile Encounters, but Rex is nowhere near as big as Rex is going to get. At full size, their carapace, the top of their shell, from front to back, can get to about 50 centimetres. And at the moment, it's probably about 25. So double what he is right now. And then the neck can be another 37 centimetres on top of that. That is an 87 centimetre turtle from nostril to tail tip. That is a big turtle. They are a very large species. Because of that, they don't tend to come out of the water too often. So if you have a look, their toes, their feet, they're webbed right to the end of the toe, all the way down. They are super aquatic and spend their time in the water. They'll even come up and sit in the shallows and things to bask, but they don't tend to pull themselves up onto dry land that often. That said, being a long neck, they will come out and bask on logs and even go for a bit of a walk between watercourses if they need to. They're a little bit keener on getting out of the water if they have to than our short-necked turtle species are. If their river or creek starts to dry up, they can get up and walk off to find another watercourse, or they do something else. They'll bury themselves in the mud. Just before everything dries out completely, they'll bury themselves right down, and they will use something called estivation. Estivation is kind of like hibernating and waiting for better conditions to come up. They can't stay like that forever, buried in the mud, but they can last for quite a long time, certainly until the next rains come through and keep everything nice and wet for them. They can come back out and go about their business. Now, being a long-necked turtle, they are a carnivore. There's no fruit and veggies on his plate. He will be eating mostly aquatic invertebrates and things. So they'll eat worms and they'll eat little freshwater crabs and yabbies and shrimp and prawns. But large broad shells will be eating things like baby water dragons, water skinks, frogs, fish, and that long neck works like a snake. That's why they get called snake-necked turtles as well. They'll pull it right back, and any prey comes within reach, whack, they snap straight out, grab it, and gobble it down. Now, even though they're really big, you can see that all their facial features are still right on the front of their head. His eyes, his nostrils, and his mouth are all right up the front there. The rest of his head seems to be doing pretty much nothing. When he wants to come to the surface to take a breath, he can stretch that long neck up, and just that tiny little bit of his head can stick up. And if he's in amongst the reeds and things, it can keep him safe from any predators that might be interested. As they start getting to this size, they don't have that many predators out of the water. But a little bit smaller, they'll definitely be getting picked off. Babies will be getting picked off by things like herons and egrets, and even medium-sized ones would be getting picked off by maybe white-bellied sea eagles and things like that. So they want to stay safe. They're found from basically throughout the Murray-Darling Basin and right up into northern Queensland. They go from the Murray River, which is about as far south as they come. They pop over a little bit in South Australia as well, and right up through New South Wales to Queensland. I think they go all the way up to Rockhampton. So it's a fairly large range. And in the north, they're very, very common. Here in Victoria, they're not. They're considered rare. And it's for a couple of reasons. The main one being, this is really, really far south for a broad-shelled turtle. They don't just suddenly stop where the line is on their distribution map and 10 metres later there's no more broad shells. There are Broadies that are found in northern Victoria, but there's not that many because it's a bit cold and it's not really suitable habitat. Now, we've also changed the Murray River. We've deepened and dredged parts of it. We've put in big weirs and things, and we've changed the way that that river is flowed. It's been flowing for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, and in the last 200 years, we've completely changed the way that it works. And that can have a really negative impact on the species that are there. We've got 3 species of turtle in Australia: the eastern longnecks, the Murray shortnecks, and these guys. And they have all been impacted on fairly negatively by human activity. These guys can stay underwater for a long time. They're one of our famous bum-breathing turtles. Up the back here, in their cloaca, which is a reptile's bum, up here they've got 2 special organs called bursae, and they can suck water up their bottom and use it for breathing. These guys can stay underwater for something like 9 or 10 hours at a time, breathing through their bum. Certainly not the longest. Our Mary River turtle, Penny, she can stay underwater for only 3 days. And another species, the Fitzroy River turtle from Queensland, can stay underwater for 3 weeks straight, breathing through its bum. So it sounds ridiculous, but it keeps them safe from predators. And up where they live, there's crocodiles, so they've got to be able to stay hidden. Now, these guys get impacted on a little bit by foxes as well. As we've spoken about in the past, things like our Murray shortnecks and eastern longnecks are very prone to having their nests dug up and their eggs eaten by foxes. These guys do something that keeps them safe for a little bit of time. What they'll do is, instead of just walking out of the water and going through the brush and digging their nest, they'll keep walking. And they've been recorded walking 300 metres uphill away from the water to lay their eggs. And they often get found laying eggs in people's backyards along the Murray River, usually with a very confused dog nearby. This means that it's harder for the foxes to find their nests, but it means that the little babies, and when they're born, they're like this. Very, very small. Baby to adult broadtail turtles, it's a huge growth spurt they got to go through. When they're born, they got to walk a long way as tiny little baby turtles. And how they do that, how they find the water in the first place, it's anybody's guess. A lot of people think it might be they can smell the water. Some people think that they can see UV being reflected up onto the clouds. And that's why you'll see them sometimes, longnecks, sitting out in the open with their heads straight up looking up. We think they might be looking for the reflection of where the water is and heading in that direction. That'd be really cool if you could prove that. These guys have got another way of breathing underwater as well. They don't just breathe through their bottom. See all these folds along his neck? Some of our long-necked turtle species can breathe through those folds as well. They can take oxygen in through the water, and that's why they've got all those folds. It increases the surface area of their neck, and they can take some of that oxygen in like that as well. You got a lot of ways of breathing there. What is this funny kick that you're doing? I'm gonna pop our dancing broadshell turtle away. See you later, Rexy. Get out of here. Here you go. This is Zilla, and Zilla is an eastern water dragon. Now, eastern water dragons are the largest dragon species in Australia. They're even bigger than our frillies. At full size, a big male eastern water dragon like Zilla can be over 1 metre long. That does include the tail, but they are a very large dragon species. Now, they're a very common sight in northeastern Australia, and in fact in Brisbane and Sydney, and even down slightly further south in Sydney. These guys are very common along rivers and even in parks and botanical gardens and things in capital cities. They will often be seen sitting on park benches and next to ponds and things, but typically they would have been found along these rivers basking on branches and fallen logs and things with their tails hanging down into the water. If any predators came along or they got a bit of a shock, they know where the water is and they can jump straight down into that water source, and they can stay submerged for around about 20 minutes to half an hour. Although they can sleep underwater a little bit as well, which means they can stay underwater a lot longer. The males are a lot bigger than the females. He's a decent sized male. He's definitely got a very, very big head for a male. But they can be a little bit bigger than this as well. And the males also tend to get nice red bellies and even red under their neck. Now, it's not the breeding season at the moment, so he hasn't got his best colours on. But in a couple of months' time, as it starts to warm up, he's definitely going to colour up a little bit more to impress all of his girlfriends. Now, these guys live in groups that we call a harem. There's be one boy and all of his girls that he looks after, and he will fight with other males to keep his girls safe. Just like other dragons, if he sees another boy, he'll start nodding his head. And that means, I'm in charge, this is my territory, what are you doing? And if the other boy slowly waves his hand, it means you're in charge, I'm just passing through, no issues. If the other boy starts nodding his head, they can end up in a fight for the territory. The winner gets to stay, gets all the girlfriends, and gets to breed and pass on his offspring. Now these guys pump out a lot of babies. They can have something like 10 to 20 eggs in a clutch. They can lay multiple clutches over the breeding season. And when they're born, they're very, very small. And lots of things like to eat them. So they have to pump out as many babies as possible to make sure that they don't accidentally all get eaten by predators. And some of them have the opportunity to grow up. Now we're seeing some amazing evolution in these guys at the moment, especially up in Brisbane, because these guys have adapted to living around people and have gone from basking on logs over rivers in the forest to basking on park benches in the middle of parks. We're seeing them begin to adapt. Their legs are changing shape a little bit. Their behaviour's changing so that they can bask on concrete bollards and stay out in the middle of paths sometimes and trip people over. But we're seeing them adapt to their new habitats. Very rapid evolution in some of their populations. Now, there's two subspecies of these guys. This is the eastern water dragon, and they're very, very close cousin. The Gippsland water dragon starts, I think, just north of Canberra and comes down through Gippsland. Doesn't quite make it to Melbourne, although both eastern and Gippsland water dragon can now be found in different parts along the Yarra River where they've been introduced. These guys are quite popular as pets because they're really big and beautiful. It's kind of Australia's answer to the green iguana. And so they're quite popular as pets, and sometimes people accidentally let them escape, and they've started up feral little populations. I think there's a little population of them in South Australia as well. They're definitely not supposed to be there. There's not really a lot of large semi-aquatic dragons for them to compete with, so they're not really doing too much damage where they're found. But still, it's a species that's not supposed to be there, and so we've got to keep an eye on them to make sure we don't accidentally end up with a feral pest that's actually a native species as well. We definitely don't want that. Now I'm going to pop Big Zilla, away. We used to have one of these guys called Rex as well.